Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. I am honored to have back with me someone who is a very dear friend and someone who is, I believe, one, if not the best investigative journalist, not just in our country, but around the world, Mary Fanning. We're doing this without the video because, well, we tried to do it with video, but our friends in, well, the CIA, NSA, the deep state, well, they just didn't want this interview to happen. So now we're trying something a little bit different, and we're doing an audio interview only. A little background on those of you not familiar with Mary. Mary Fanning is a national security investigative journalist for the American Report, website theamericanreport.org, and also publishes at the Center for Security Policy. She is a contributor for Breitbart News, LifeZette, Big League Politics, 1776 Channel, and the Community's Digital News. It is my honor to welcome back Mary Fanning. Mary, welcome back to the Insider Insight Show.
It's very nice to be with you, Dave.
Oh, the
Thank
connection.
you for having me.
Well, let's see how far we go this time, Mary. Let's get right to it. Let's get right to it before the deep state scums cut us off. You and Alan Jones, who you work with, threw a huge wrench in the deep state's week, month, year, decade. You and Alan published a book this past weekend that I actually spoke about on my YouTube channel and also on my on our WTF show this week, entitled "The Hammer is the Key to the Coup: The Political Crime of the Century." This book has rocketed to this top, much to the chagrin of the deep state, to the top of the list, a number of lists at Amazon. Educate our listeners on the book and the background behind the book.
We began investigating the whistleblower, what we christened the whistleblower tapes, when a federal district judge, G. Murray Snow, released them from his courtroom. They were never to have been released. The whistleblower tapes, as it turns out, were recorded by supposed detective Mike Zullo, who was working for Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio. They ended up in a court case. They were secret tapes, and they were supposed to remain that way. But as it turned out, Zullo was recording Dennis Montgomery, unbeknownst to Montgomery. This is important because Dennis Montgomery is a CIA contractor who worked directly for John Brennan and James Clapper. Understand that Montgomery, his home had been raided in 2006. It ended up in a messy lawsuit. The FBI was slapped down by the judge, told to return Montgomery all of his property. What is important about this is that Montgomery in 2003 had created a super surveillance computer system that ran exploits that could spy on people. It was only a foreign surveillance tool. It was never to be turned against Americans. There were multiple echelons of safeguards and sign-offs for the intelligence community in order to access this super surveillance system. Not only did they have to go through 17 steps, including the FISA court, in order to get access to the HAMR, but that included the President of the United States. He could not access the HAMR to get information without going through these multiple echelons of safeguards and sign-offs. So that's very important to understand, that it was a foreign, only to be used for foreign surveillance. It was used on the battlefield, and it was used to keep terrorists from hitting the United States, once again, like 9/11. That's what the HAMR was created for. That was what it was supposed to be utilized for. So when the whistleblower tapes when they were dropped by this federal judge, D. Murray Snow, and it's not clear exactly where they came from. This supposed detective, Mike Zullo, said that the ACLU dropped them, but they didn't because Dennis Montgomery spoke to the ACLU attorney. What happened, what's important is we had President Trump come out and say that he was being spied upon. He tweeted it out. We tweeted back to him, "You're being spied upon by the HAMR and Brennan and Clapper." And we had written a piece then, their wiretapping was the word he used, you a zillion times, because that was the language off of the whistleblower tapes. At that point, we released an article. Our site was totally demolished. It was tracked back to the Ukraine by the experts that ran the platform. So we put the piece out again on March 17th. On March 19th, and this is very important, on March 19th, four-star Admiral James Ace Lyons and General Thomas McInerney, a three-star Air Force general who was in charge, this is not your regular, any old general, he was in charge of our nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. They came to a radio show, Operation Freedom, with Dr. Dave Janda. And they brought that information on that radio show from our article, and they told that they were using Brennan and Clapper and Obama were in fact wiretapping Donald Trump. Now, this is important because can you imagine any other? This has never happened in America before. Running an espionage operation on, number one, a candidate, and then number two, it continued into his administration that they were running an operation on a duly elected U.S. president. So Admiral Lyons and General, these are cold warriors. They understood what the implications of setting up a spying apparatus on everyone in the country, because the whistleblower tapes also told that they had turned this surveillance system against the Supreme Court, the FISA court, members of Congress, business leaders, military leaders. Everyone was under surveillance for what Dennis Montgomery said was for blackmail and leverage. So imagine that. You have these people who, by the way, all have communist backgrounds. John Brennan, not only did he vote for Gus Hall, but when you look into his father and his uncles and his grandfather, they were all members of the IRA. I did not even understand that the IRA had heavy Soviet connections and that they were being armed and trained by Andropov in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And so you start looking at these people who are spying on Donald Trump, and there's a very red thread, a very communist link to all of these people. So at this point, when you've got two men of sterling character, and let me include three men, Dr. Dave Janda, bringing this information to America's airwaves, it's not just anyone that's talking about this. These are men from the highest echelons of our government who have served it for a long time. You know, men of sterling character, men of sterling reputation who are bringing this to America's airwaves. This becomes a stunning moment in history. And we know that the deep state heard about it because after we published this piece, after these admiral and a general go on Operation Freedom with Dr. Janda, when the IG releases text messages between Strzok and Page, we put together a timeline, and we found that Strzok and Page were texting within minutes on a Sunday evening about Dennis Montgomery and his attorney, the exact people who on that very evening of March 19th, 2017, brought it to America's airwaves. So that becomes very important because it shows that Strzok and Page are aware of this, and further that they are aware of Dennis Montgomery, the CIA contractor who became a whistleblower. Now, it's very important to understand that, as I said, Montgomery created this for America's protection, not to turn America into a totalitarian police state. Montgomery, in becoming a whistleblower, went to all 17 agencies and filed whistleblower complaints that they had turned the system against America. Understand, the CIA does not have the legal right to spy on Americans. They are only to do foreign surveillance. They hold no charter to spy on America. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, at this point, they are exposed. But understand something else. Dennis Montgomery didn't just send this to the 17 agencies to file complaints. He is a wizard in computers, and I don't know where he gets all of his information, but he faxed directly into the Oval Office the whistleblower complaint to Barack Obama's own fax machine and to Joe Biden's fax machine. And he told them in these whistleblower complaints the illegal behavior that was taking place by John Brennan and James Clapper. That's very important to understand. They were all in on it. So
and the other people that were in on it that you outline dissect. It's a surgical dissection. The book, it's brilliant. And the other people that you are Comey and Mueller. In fact, Mary, tell me if I'm wrong, but the sugar daddy that provided the funding and the hardware initially for this surveillance program, the HAMR, was none other than Robert Mueller.
That's correct. As General McInerney likes to say, that's spot on. So in 2003, when they built the super surveillance system, as I said, it was for foreign surveillance only. And again, it had multiple echelons. You could not access this. It was kept away, so that others could not access it. Remember, this is technology that Montgomery owns. He created all this. He is a contractor for the CIA, but he's working for the protection of the government. Beyond that, he's involved in many other programs where he's created drone programs, etc., for our protection, only for America's protection. So Montgomery's raided by Mueller, or Mueller, whichever pronunciation you prefer. And he goes to court. He exposes that Mueller is the one who provided the computers. Now, at this point, it's an operation that's working not out of Washington, D.C. It's off the grid in Reno, and it's different places. It's a distributed network. And at this point, when on February 3rd, 2009, Brennan and Clapper move the HAMR. It's expanded greatly. It becomes much more powerful to Fort Washington, Maryland. So that's February 3rd, 2009, as Barack Obama takes taken office.
Now, Fort Washington. Educate our listeners on Fort Washington. This isn't some little facility where anybody can come and go as they please. This is quite the sinister place. Am I right in that assessment?
It is a secret facility. No one knows much about it. It's a CIA facility. There's other naval intel operations that work on. Interestingly, to understand how people feel about it, cab drivers, if someone says, bring me in here, and they're directing them to go into Fort Washington, they're all wise. They're like, I am not going in there. Anyone that goes in there never comes out again. They're all scared to death of the facility. So they're aware of it to some degree. And they're aware not to go anywhere. You can't get in. It's, it's not someplace you can just directly access. It's well guarded.
So it gets moved to Fort Washington. Then what happens? Because now, as you mentioned, February 2009, very soon after Barack Obama took office, next thing you know, it's now been flipped from watching terrorists internationally to, hey, let's commandeer this ourselves. Let's privatize this, Obama, Brennan, and Clapper. And let's illegally surveil our political opponents to garner information in order to enhance control and, if you will, coercion.
Exactly. So within 2 weeks of Obama taking office, they moved this facility. They moved the HAMR to this facility. And Montgomery's back and forth into the facility. And he sees that instead of, monitoring terrorists, that they're monitoring the Supreme Court justices, particularly Justice John Roberts and Justice Scalia. They're looking at members of Congress, well over 100 members of Congress. In fact, in this latest iteration of, looking at security, you just had, as they're asking questions, you had Senator one senator say, am I under surveillance? Ted Cruz, was I under surveillance during the election too? As the intel committees are now digging into this. And the answer to that is yes, Ted Cruz, you were under surveillance by this computer system.
And Rand Paul has brought up similar questions, and he was also under surveillance.
He was also under surveillance. So, Americans need to consider this. Can you even imagine what the Stasi or the Gestapo would have done with this type of a powerful surveillance system? They didn't even need to wait for people to rat you out, because they've got a system that knows everything that's on your computer, every picture you have, every phone call, every text messages, everything. And Montgomery tells that there were over 22 million Americans that they had under surveillance, and that they were, they weren't just collecting the information and looking at it. They were then taking it to another supercomputer system that's known for how fast it can collate material. And then they were creating the files on those Americans. Beyond which, if you don't have something in your file, Dennis Montgomery told that they were putting on people's computers intelligence information that could get them arrested, or information about pedophilia so they could arrest people based upon that.
What a special group.
Well, I think part of it is the fact that so many of them have communist affiliations.
Yes.
So Montgomery, as I said, he contacts 17 agencies, but it's important then what we found are timelines. You can't make assertions. You can't, unless you have proof. You cannot say anything without proof positive. We've already had 5 lawsuits, attempted in order to shut us up from bringing forth certain information.
Well, and one of the other issues that you bring forward in the book, Mary, is that another individual that was illegally surveilled for years was General Flynn.
General Flynn, in fact, Dennis Montgomery mentions all these people that are under surveillance. Supreme Court justices, 156 Article 3 judges, which perhaps includes Judge Emmett Sullivan. Mm-hmm. But what he says is that in particular, they wiretapped Donald Trump a zillion times, and they were wiretapping Donald Trump's businesses, his family, his 17 businesses, every one of his family members, and most interested as well in General Mike Flynn. Not only were they, again, wiretapping, General Flynn, but his family, particularly his son. This is his extended family. But you need to stop and think about this. We don't just say, oh, they had General Flynn under surveillance and they were wiretapping him and illegally surveilling him. But this was General Flynn, who was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mm-hmm. He has all of our defense secrets. He is looking at the intelligence that protects this country, and then he's under surveillance by this cabal. Now, the timelines are very important because we find that from the moment Admiral Ace Lyons and General McInerney come on Operation Freedom and they break this information into the public, that you now are looking at finding that Strzok and Page are texting about Dennis Montgomery, which, by the way, this is very unusual information that's breaking on the airwaves. It's just after the election. This is March of 2017. 1 year later, when the IG report starts releasing text messages from Strzok and Page, we find that they're talking about Montgomery that night after General McInerney has been on Operation Freedom. Then we put together in a downstream all the text messages that we find from Strzok and Page. And it's breathtaking. It truly is breathtaking when you put together this timeline that we've put together. And you see from the moment, we don't see them to begin texting until we first break the story open. And we put the timeline together. Montgomery turns over the 47 hard drives in August of 2015. The day after is when Strzok and Page begin to text. Mm-hmm. And she tells about her new position. In these text messages that we put together, there's a timeline that lines up exactly with when Montgomery hands over this information. Then another one shows them talking about interviewing with General Clapper. And the downstream, you cannot walk away from looking at these text messages between Strzok and Page from the moment that Montgomery hands over the 47 hard drives. Understand, those 47 hard drives contain an extraordinary amount of information, 600 million documents, that if you took them and piled them one upon the other, reached 30 miles high. 30 miles high of illegal surveillance on Americans by the HAMR.
Now, Mary, you mentioned in the book that when Dennis got in the plane to fly to Florida,
mm-hmm.
and when the plane arrived in Florida,
yeah,
when he got on the plane, Mary, how many hard drives did he have?
That's an interesting story. So Montgomery gets on the plane and he flies to Florida with his son-in-law accompanying him, and he brings 53 hard drives.
53?
Every one of them is wrapped, taped, and boxed. He puts them through the TSA, and they fly down. It's a nonstop flight. They go to meet his attorney before they hand this over to the FBI. When they arrive and they're taking off the boxes, they've all been opened en route. They've all been opened, each one individually boxed, taped, wrapped. They're all unwrapped. So someone went through those en route, and those 53 became 47. Someone stole 6 of them.
And do we have any idea of those 6, what those 6 might have been involved with? Or is that something you can't go into?
Yeah, Montgomery's very careful about, remember, he had invoked upon him a government protective order and a state secrets privilege. He has and still maintains a TS-SCI, top security clearance, with access to SAP. So this is not just, this is as high as the security clearance goes. In fact, most Americans and even some generals did not know that there was such a thing as this SAP, Secure Access Programs, because this is the top security information in our government. It's the location of our silos. It's the missile silos for nuclear war, should we ever end up in that. God forbid we do, and that sort of a place and time. But it's also the information of who our live intel, who our spies are on the ground across the world that are out there to keep this country safe. And so Dennis Montgomery has case-specific access. So you have to understand how high level what he did, and since the 80s for this country, is. And so Montgomery, the other piece that's really important to understand is we didn't understand what SAP was until James Comey exposed the information about Hillary Clinton's emails on her illegal server, that it contained SAP information. Mm-hmm. And while we don't have proof, we knew that the Chinese had gotten access to that information, mm-hmm. and they told that the Chinese military had accessed it. They told where and how and through what company. And what's important is that then they announced in the New York Times that all of our live intel had been captured, tortured, and killed in China.
After this whole incident with Hillary's server, yeah. With
the exposure of her server, and that foreign powers had infiltrated it, and that they had, beyond which, remember, she and her assistant, Uma, were removing the designations off of this. They were taking off SAP, the headings that this is, hello, this is very high level security. Don't, you don't have access to it. You may not pass it. This is our top security information. This is the information that keeps America and Americans safe. And so that was being accessed by the Chinese. And then, then the New York Times puts out the fact that in 2011, 1 year after Hillary was in office, every single one of our intel was captured, tortured, murdered in China. We had no live intel left.
And many people say, well, why hasn't Dennis Montgomery come forward and done an interview? And you already actually answered that question, but it's important that we talk about this. The reason is he not only had a protective order generated, several of them generated against him by the United States government, but in fact, the state secrets privilege was invoked against him, which, according to Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, is the ultimate in silencing someone.
Yeah, it's a government muzzle. And if you say anything, you're directly charged with treason and imprisoned for life. So think about knowing that piece of information, and then he's being illegally recorded. And so all these many, many hours of recordings, Montgomery doesn't reveal anything about this government and the state secrets that he holds. He does not tell them at all. He's dedicated his life to trying to protect this country, but he became very disturbed when he saw that Obama, Brennan, and Clapper virtually stole the keys to the kingdom of America by taking this super surveillance system, by commandeering it and using it for their own purposes.
Now, Mary, James Baker, the former general counsel under Barack Obama and James Comey at the FBI, James Baker testified under oath to Congress in October of 2018. And educate our listeners about that testimony and how it confirmed everything Dennis Montgomery had said about the illegal surveillance and that this information was turned over by Dennis Montgomery to the FBI and Department of Justice representatives in Florida.
That was a breaking point in all of this, because you step back, he hands that information over in Florida to the FBI. Then James Baker has so FBI general counsel, who was part of negotiating the immunity agreements for Dennis Montgomery to come forward and hand over the 47 hard drives. He goes before Congress, and on his second day, he says, I need to change my testimony, because they'd asked him if they knew of any spying operations, because in fact, this Intelligence Committee meeting was about whether Donald Trump, or whether there was any evidence of anyone spying on Americans or on Donald Trump. And James Baker comes forward and he says, in fact, I have evidence of this, because there was this man in Florida that I sent the FBI, who, in fact, the people that he sent down were none other than, Assistant U.S. Attorney Deborah Curtis, who had struck the immunity agreements with General Counsel James Baker, the FBI General Counsel James Baker. They went there with Walter Giardina and William Barnett, who were the FBI special agents, my number one FBI special agents, according to Comey, to pick up, he sent his two right-hand men to pick up the 47 hard drives. Now, Baker starts telling before this members of Congress that, in fact, he sent people down and they had proof that Americans were being surveilled and government officials by other government officials. And so this information becomes public when Doug Collins drops that piece of information.
Congressman from Georgia.
Patriot congressman from Georgia, who is one of the few people who come forward and actually tell the truth, and few government officials who know about some of this. So you now got the FBI's general counsel saying that he's aware that this was taking place and that he took the evidence of this. He has the surveillance data in hand. He took the electronic data that proved this. And so this he's telling that he knows that there were certain government officials illegally spying on other government officials and Americans. So now you've got a picture of what blackmail and leverage looks like.
Right. So, and Dennis thought, okay, I'm turning this stuff in because I'm a whistleblower so that they can criminally prosecute these people, Obama, Brennan, Clapper, and a number of others, for this illegal surveillance. But instead, Mary, they took that information and they didn't prosecute anybody. They were intent on doing what with it?
They buried it.
Yeah.
And perhaps they utilized it.
Yeah.
And so, and then it's important to see that they now have in hand the fact that, and the evidence of, that General Flynn is being wiretapped illegally, and so is Donald Trump and President Trump. They have that evidence in hand. So that evidence gets given to FBI General Counsel James Baker. It's given to Deborah Curtis. And interestingly, Assistant U.S. Attorney Deborah Curtis, who again struck the immunity agreements and helped to take evidence, she also, that was part one of his immunity agreements, to hand over the 47 hard drives. Part two of that immunity agreement, there's two immunity agreements, was to give testimony. So in December of 2015, Montgomery, accompanied by his son-in-law, went to Washington, D.C., and went to the FBI's Washington field office, their SCIF, and they went into the secure SCIF where Deborah Curtis debriefed him along with Walter Giardina and William Barnett.
Comey's two right-hand guys.
These are Comey's two special agents, his two right-hand guys, his two top guys. So they're in a SCIF and they debrief him. And this is under oath while being videotaped. And they go into top SAP intelligence information. They're debriefing him about all sorts of things. And so now they have not only his testimony and the 47 hard drives, but keep in mind, when he handed over those 47 hard drives, not until they verified them from August until December, would they then take his personal testimony. So everything from the 47 hard drives was verified before they gave him part two of the immunity agreements and took his testimony. So
Mary, if he was lying about anything, they would have hit him with a perjury charge in a quick minute, but they never did that.
Well, it's not just that. If he lied about any of this, he would have been in jail so fast.
Right, because he had the state secrets privilege that had already been invoked on him since 2006.
Well, and we also see where they claim a lie from General Flynn that never happened, and like one minor lie, and you're looking at 5 years. So imagine a guy who holds the top security intelligence and is under the state secrets privilege, which has been invoked upon him, and the government protective order, which is really just a muzzle should you open your mouth with these high-level secrets, which he would never open his mouth about any of this stuff. He's about protecting this country.
So, Mary, the question comes up. People say, how is this guy still alive?
Well, I imagine that they imagine that he knows a lot more information, and beyond which, they don't have the key to how this whole system works. Only he does.
Right. It's called, we talk about a dead man switch, that if something happens to a person, you, me, whatever, Dennis, whatever, anybody, General McInerney, if something happens to us or our families, that we have information spread out around the country and around the world that would immediately be released that would be deleterious to the deep state. Dennis Montgomery, and tell me if he doesn't have a dead man switch. He has a dead man's
nuclear bomb.
Generator. Right? I mean, this is not just a switch, and this is why he's still alive, Mary.
That's right. So you don't have a computer genius that's done all the things that he's done that isn't well aware that he needs to keep protections, but he's mostly concerned about the people who were doing this and
right.
the access of the different places that they were infiltrating, law firms, people who are put together, Lockheed, the defense contractors, banks, the Federal Reserve, the bioweapons labs, the top bioweapon 4 labs. So he's concerned about the infiltration of where they were going and, what they were doing with that information. Were they enriching themselves? Were they giving it to our adversaries? He's concerned exactly what these he's concerned who these people are who have gotten involved in the system and seem to have turned it against America rather than working for America.
Mary, when we look at the situation, the landscape, I know you're very frustrated. I'm very frustrated. Dennis is very frustrated. Many people, General McInerney is very frustrated over the number of people that have buried their head in the sand when it comes to this issue. But there is one particular person that I want to talk about who recently has alluded to, and really more than alluded to, opened Pandora's box as it relates to what Dennis Montgomery has provided the government, the insight. And that is Rick Grinnell, former ambassador to Germany, the former acting director of national intelligence. Rick Grinnell has really been incredibly courageous in opening Pandora's box. Educate our listeners about Rick Grinnell and what he has done.
I will. Let me step back for 1 second. And it is important to understand that the day after, the very next day, the very next morning, after Admiral Lyons, General McInerney, Dave Janda exposed this on Operation Freedom, the very next morning, we have FBI Director James Comey launching the Russia collusion investigation before Congress. The next morning at 9 a.m. he goes before Congress and he launches the hoax, fabricated Russia collusion investigation into Donald Trump. And who does he put in charge of it? Well, that guy, Peter Strzok, that we found was texting about Dennis Montgomery a year later, immediately after you guys come off the air. So I'm sorry to interrupt your train of thought.
No, because
there,
that's
Dave,
an important point, Mary. That the Russian hoax, the Ukraine hoax, the impeachment hoax were all generated to cover and distract people from what was coming forward about the illegal surveillance, which are truly treasonous, done by Obama, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, Mueller, and the like.
And that is exactly right. You have Admiral Lyons on his deathbed with General McInerney visiting his dear old friend. And Admiral Lyons turns to General McInerney and he says, "Tom, the hammer is the key to the coup." Hence the title of our book. The hammer is the key to the coup. We know from not just that one text message, Dave, all the many text messages that we put together. Page saying the minute Donald Trump is elected, well, I'll go buy my copy of of the Watergate. So, and he's not going to be elected. He's not going to stay in office, right? And Strzok says, right. We'll never let this happen. So this is premeditation. This shows premeditation of the coup and what they planned on doing and what they did do for since Donald Trump, not only took office, but before he took office. So they knew where they were going. And Admiral Lyons understood that.
Well, and Admiral Lyons was obviously a friend of yours, mine. His best friend was General McInerney. Admiral Lyons was a regular on our radio show. And I can tell you that in the conversations I would have with Admiral Lyons, he, from March 19th, 2017 on till when he died in December of 2018. And he was last on my show about 6 weeks before he died, and I spoke to him several times between when he was last on my show and when he died. He always, Mary, made the point, David, you can still kind of hear his, David, it is important, it is critical that you keep educating the public about the HAMR. And he would drilled into me. It is the key to the coup. It is the key to General Flynn's freedom. Mm-hmm. And it is the key to the future of our country that people know what happened. He drilled that into me, Mary.
Dave, I can still hear his voice bellowing.
I can too.
That deep, rich voice calling it 5:45 in the morning. And you would hear his voice come through the phone. And I will tell you, I'm not military. I don't have a military background, but I never jumped out of my bed so fast and tried to sound like I was wide awake. But he was a patriot, and he knew that if we didn't stop this, that this was putting in place a Stasi surveillance system, and understand that they stole the system. Look at who's got this in hand, and Dennis Montgomery told that Barack Obama, through an encrypted VPN, had access at will to this system. So
in the White House,
which gives you pause. And so all this unmasking that we didn't know where it was coming from and who was doing this. And so when they're looking at who's spying on General Flynn, and you hear about Sally Yates, and she said she didn't know how Barack Obama had this information. How did he have the information on the Kislyak Flynn call? And then you have Richard Grenell, this incredible patriot, who had been, the acting director of the IC community, and he comes out and he says, it wasn't our product. This information didn't come from our intelligence community. Those 17 intelligence agencies in the IC community do not have these transcripts and summaries. It wasn't our product. So gosh, whose product was it?
There's only one product it could have been, Mary, from an illegal surveillance platform, which was the platform called the HAMR.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting things that took place is Maria Bartiromo. My gosh, she was interviewing Valerie Jarrett, and she said, "Who are these people spying? Who is doing this in this country?" She said, "I'm a patriot. I do not want to see people in positions of power putting their finger on the scale and making up stories about collusion with foreign powers when there's no evidence of this. It didn't happen." And she said, people are going to jail. People are going to jail for this. Well, go back and watch the body language of Valerie Jarrett. And she said, well, this is not how it works. That's not how our investigations work. We leave this up to the intelligence community. Hello? It's not our product. It didn't come from the intelligence community.
And then this past week, Rick Grenell tweets, "You know what undercuts democracy? Not having a peaceful transition of power because one party is conducting a surveillance program in the other." To which I tweeted to Rick Grenell, boom, Rick Grenell continues to shine the light of truth on the illegal surveillance of Donald Trump, General Flynn, judges, and hundreds of Obama political opponents by Obama, Brennan, Clapper, Comey with the HAMR platform. And then who retweeted that but Sidney Powell?
That's not only that. Sidney Powell has gone on Fox News on 3 occasions with 2 with Elizabeth McDonald, and referenced the HAMR and Brennan's fusion delusion, and spoken to again. Grinnell also has gone on, and he says, in the weeks of January 2017, before Trump ever took office, President Biden was requesting unmaskings of the Russian phone call. He knew exactly all of this before the unmasking.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone in that group, they leaked it to the media, which is a felony, like many of the felonies that were committed. And he said the unmasking that I declassified was done during the transition, when we should have had a peaceful transition of power. Mm-hmm. Instead, we have a strategy to bring down the Trump administration before it has even started. Now, people, you've heard this for almost 4 years now, 3.5 years. This is not the norm. This is not how America.
Oh, they're breaking you up, Mary.
We're not a third world country. The one dictator is overthrowing the next to take power, and that we go to war. What? Can you hear nothing? Yes or no?
They just tried to break you up, Mary. We heard about 30% of what you said.
Well, Rick Grinnell spoke to this transition. And that we don't do this. We are not a third world country where one dictator is fighting another. Obama needs to understand, and perhaps it's because he spent his youth in Indonesia rather than America, that he doesn't understand how the government works. But this is not how it works in this country. Mm-hmm. You didn't win the country. It wasn't given to you. You serve it for 8 years. Not think that you're taking it over. Keys to the kingdom, because now you own it.
Mary, if it's okay with you, I'd like to conclude our interview with. I want to read the introductory, the beginning of the introductory overview to the book.
I think that's exactly what.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the introductory overview to your book as we conclude this interview, because you're starting to break this up. But I want to read this. During his last days on Earth, U.S. Navy Admiral James A. Ace Lyons, former commander of the U.S. Navy Pacific Fleet, seemed less concerned about dying than about stopping the coup d'etat against President Trump. As Admiral Lyons lay on his deathbed, he reached over to his longtime and trusted friend and fellow Cold Warrior, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General Tom McInerney, and said, "Tom, the hammer is the key to the coup." Admiral Lyons, who as commander of the U.S. Navy Pacific Fleet led the largest military command in the world, spoke those words to General McInerney one final time as General McInerney sat beside his old friend on his last day. Admiral Lyons was certain that the deep state had launched the hoax Russian collusion coup against President Trump in order to cover up the Obama administration's criminal domestic surveillance operation, the HAMR. The CIA's charter prohibits the intelligence agency from spying on the American people, but that did not stop President Obama, John Brennan, and James Clapper from doing just that. President Obama, John Brennan, and James Clapper commandeered a powerful foreign surveillance tool known as the HAMR in order to illegally spy on the American people, according to the CIA contractor turned whistleblower Dennis Montgomery. These co-conspirators illicitly turned the HAMR against the American people. Obama, Brennan, and Clapper illegally harvested massive amounts of domestic surveillance data. Mary, I'd like to thank you and Alan Jones for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. You are incredible patriots. I will have the link to the book. Right now, Amazon's played some tricks with Mary in the past day. You could normally just go to Amazon.com and type in "The Hammer is the Key to the Coup" or Mary Fanning, and the book would pop up. Not now. The only way you can get there is by having the link. They are actively trying to suppress, yet again, this information from coming to you your family, your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers, and every American citizen. Do not let them be victorious. And yet again, the way they're suppressing this information, that Mary Fanning and Alan Jones have had the courage, the determination, the tenacity, and to put their lives on the line to present. Take this link, give some gifts, get this book to anyone and everyone you know. The more people that are knowledgeable about this, specifically before November 3rd, the sooner we end this reign of terror by the deep state. I also encourage you to go to Mary's website and Alan Jones' website, theamericanreport.org. I thank you, Mary, if you still happen to be there, if they haven't cut you off from our communication line.
I'm here, Dave. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mary, for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. And I thank you, folks, for joining us today. Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Get that book and network it.